everyone, next I will introduce you to my major project working process. The inspiration for this project came from an experience I had as a child living in the countryside. My cousin caught a sparrow for me to cheer me up, but as a child I did not have the ability to empathize with other creatures, and I treated the sparrow as a playing thing, and eventually died in my play. Growing up, I understood the meaning of life and regretted my previous actions, but I could never get that sparrow's life back. When we were children, we saw the world as a place of fun and adventure, and we tried many new things out of curiosity and naivety. But when we grow up and start looking back at what we did as children through the filter of our childhood, we are surprised to find out that those childhood adventures were actually gray, even cruel, and that we unconsciously harmed many creatures in the process. Through my personal experience and research studies, the findings have shown that child animal abuse is actually very common. I hope to aim to shed light on the seriousness of child cruelty to animals, to draw public attention and concern to this issue. Through this project, I hope to send an important message to the people that children need to focus on the welfare and needs of the animals in their interaction with them, rather than just on their own pleasure and excitement. Everyone's experience and background is different, and there may be other reasons for this animal abuse. In any case, it is important to develop empathy, responsibility, and moral awareness when teaching and guiding children to understand the importance of respecting and protecting life. In the early stage of my research, I collected real-life cases of child cruelty to animals and relied on ethics and child psychology to analyze and research. These are some of the case videos I found. I was really surprised to find that in these cases of children abusing animals, the children's parents always downplay the seriousness of the matter, reasoning that the children were just playing and did not know what animals abuse was, and did not educate their children afterwards. I therefore became more aware of the importance of education and that teaching children to protect animals is an effective measure to prevent violence. So I set the direction of my research and creative work on educating the young generation on how to respect and protect life. I created a questionnaire on children development and psychology, and the impact of children's behavior on development. The result of the questionnaire was used to analyze the psychological reasons for children's cruelty to other creatures and to help me understand the reasons behind the children's cruel behavior. And I created some illustrations based on the response of the research participants about how they talk about cruelty to animals when they were children, using monoprint and black ink to create this cruel and dark atmosphere. According to the result of questionnaire and my research, we can roughly understand the following reasons for animal abuse by children. The community I choose to situate it in is RSPCA, Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The RSPCA is the UK's largest animal welfare charity, and in 2020, the RSPCA investigated and rescued over 57,000 animal cruelty cases, concerned about the attitudes and behaviors of young people towards animals, and this fits in my project, so I choose to situate it in this community. Reflections on the initial research work. Due to a misunderstanding of the definition of community, I mistakenly thought that a group of people with the same experience could be called a community, but such a definition made my preliminary research work difficult, and I had a vague idea of the audience for my future work. However, after relearning the definition of community, I chose to base my work on a real-life animal welfare charity and improved it based on some exciting data and the funding philosophy of the organization, as well as the target group of the charity's activity. The transformation from research to narrative writing. I choose to use storytelling to convey what I wanted to say. I think stories are more immersive and empathetic to the audience, so I started researching and creating the story after the preliminary research. I didn't want to conceive of my work in terms of preaching that animals live in a harmony and beauty with humans. I really didn't like the words that were too child-orientated. They were too pretty, too sweet, and some of them were too childish. I wanted to express something more mature and universal sympathetic. And even though I was creating story with children as the main characters, my audience was by no means only dealing with children, who I think are much more respective and aesthetically interested in than we think. And a slightly darker story also need to fit right in with my desire to reveal that children are sometimes cruel, that they treat animals in a brutal way, and that such a story might make people realize what a serious thing this is for us to take. I wrote the story with reference to the narrative structure and style of some films that are also in the dark genre. The original Hans Christian Andersen and Brothers Grimm fairy tales are in fact dark, but it is this dark ending that often also conveys the true humanity and the cruelty to the real world, and it is this true ending that causes the viewer to reflect and pay more attention than the perfectly adapted fairy tale. This is my story's outline. This story describes how a little dog, a big dog, and a cat come across a lost and crying child in the forest. They try to calm the child down until she laughs. The animals are fascinated by the child's laughter and play with her. However, as time goes on, the animals lost patience and the child's laughter does not satisfy them. They become excited by the child's screams and cries and start to treat her roughly, pushing her down, grabbing her, and throw her into the water, where the child struggles for a while and the animal leaves bored. In the end, the narrative perspective shifts to reveal that this is in fact the fantasy of the puppy on the verge of death after being abused by the children. In the individual stories, I have changed the conventional narrative perspective and position between the character, using the animal as the abuser and the child as the object of the abuse. The shift in narrative perspective might give the audience a better understanding of what it is like to be a damaged animal and allow the audience to empathize. This is the current version of my story, and I'm still working on the parts of the story that doesn't make sense or doesn't flow well. My story is not only intended to be a reaction to the abuse of animals by children, but also to create 3 characters with different personalities, through the plot to metaphorize a real-life incident in which a vicious event takes place with several real people. The big dog in the story is the instigator of the victimization of the little girl, and instead of acting as a moral role model for the group, he acts as the leader of the group, encouraging weaker members of the group to do bad things. The narrator puppy, as the instigated perpetrator, is a true reflection of me as a child. He understands that he is in a group where he is not responsible for his own actions, and so at the end of the story, he indulges his evil instincts. The white cat is a bystander throughout, perhaps symbolic of many of us who choose to remain silent when we see animal cruelty happening, or who simply don't realize what a terrible thing it is. These are some of the experiments and the sketches I have done so far in line with the development of my project. In the early stage of the experiment, I still had some cute images, but this did not fit with the style of my story, and so gradually I brought my style closer to the dark story I was telling. And I also try experimenting with various media to produce images like woodblock prints, etching, and jacqueline prints, and pencil watercolor combination and some monoprints. I wanted to use mixed media hand painting as a creative form. I thought that the rough texture of hand painting or the clash of various material would suit my storytelling style. I have experimented with acrylics, watercolor, charcoal, glue, and other combination of media in the experimental phase, trying to create a wild and free style and texture. In terms of paper choice, I'm still experimenting with different texture and materials, trying to find the paper that can render several materials well as my original paper. That's how far I've gotten so far, and I will continue to refine my story and start working on the storyboard next. Thank you so much for your listening.